Hi there, my name is Christopher Harrison, and this is going to be Querying SQL Server 2012. As a 10-second background on myself, I've been doing SQL Server since 2001, .NET development since about the same time, and SharePoint for a good handful of years now. What I want to do in this lesson is talk a little bit about the intended audience for this course and also talk a bit about how to best use this course to get the most out of it. So the first big question to ask is, well, who are you? Who is the intended audience for this, and who can pick up the most from this course? Well, the first group of people that are going to be able to pick up quite a bit are going to be report writers. Now, under that huge umbrella of report writers, I'm including people who might be creating reports inside of reporting services, or for Crystal reports, or maybe using Performance Point with SharePoint, or maybe just simply creating charts inside of Excel, and they need to pull their information from a database. Now, I would mention that the vast majority of what we're going to talk about would actually work with almost any database. It doesn't necessarily have to be SQL Server. So even if you're going to be pulling information from, say, MySQL, a lot of what you'd be learning on the query writing section would apply to that database product as well. The next group of people is developers that are going to be using SQL Server. Basically, every application that you create these days is nothing but a front end for a database. And so developers need to be able to query and work with data inside of a database. This can also be very helpful for developers that are going to be using SQL as a stepping stone, as a first step into deeper knowledge of SQL. In a lot of shops, one of the things that you'll notice is that the developers are also responsible for creating and potentially even maintaining the database, the latter being a bit more rare, but the former definitely being very common. So developers these days do need a pretty solid understanding of SQL Server, and this could serve as those first steps into getting into SQL Server. Last but not least, is anybody looking to become a database administrator. That if you're going to be a database administrator, your job is to support your users as they go off and find the data that they need. Well, in order to best support our users, we need to figure out how it is that they're going to be grabbing their data, and we need a starting point. This is that perfect starting point. This is going to be that perfect spot where we can take a look at how to query and work with our data, and a little bit of basics on how to work with objects as well. As far as the course itself goes, you can absolutely watch this thing from start to finish, or you can bounce around as needed. The one thing that I want to highlight is that really this course breaks down into three main sections: working with SQL data, working with XML data, and then working with SQL objects. Let's talk a little bit about who each section is going to be targeted at. The first section will be on writing queries. Now you'll notice if you take a look at the outline that in that first section, we're going to spend the vast majority of our time focusing in on the select statement. And that's by design, because you're going to notice that the vast majority of your time in working with SQL is going to be focused on the select statement. Now there will be a section on actually working with transactions, modifying data, but the main focus there is going to be on retrieving data. As a result, the target audience here is going to be people that are new to SQL Server, that maybe you had a database thrust upon you, all of a sudden somebody came up to you and said, hey, I need you to start creating reports, and you're not quite sure of exactly where to start, and here's a good starting point. Or maybe what you decided to do is you decided, all right, you know what, I'm going to go headlong into this, I'm going to figure all this out, and now you're stopping and going, I feel like there's more. I feel like my life could be easier. I need to learn some different tips, tricks, and otherwise. So those are my two main target audiences here, is people that are new to SQL and people that are maybe looking to fill in gaps. Now, the one thing that I do want to highlight about that lesson is that this is prerequisite knowledge for every single person that's going to be working in a database. So even if you're maybe saying, well, I'm only ever going to be a DBA, I'm only ever going to be, backing up my database, things like that, being able to write select statements, being able to write update statements is really still required knowledge for DBAs as well. So this is going to be required knowledge for everyone. The second section is XML. And we're going to take a look at a relatively high-level overview of how XML works inside of SQL Server. Now, XML, in my experience, is something that people will use quite extensively or not at all, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of middle ground. And I would also say that the people that are not using XML inside of SQL far outnumber the people that are using XML inside of SQL Server. So as a result, for real-world application, the XML section, quite frankly, is probably going to have a relatively limited target audience. That being said, however, if you are a developer and you're going to be passing XML to and from SQL, this is obviously going to be very important for you. Or if you are looking to take the 7461, the SQL Server querying exam, you will need to understand how to retrieve and how to parse XML inside of SQL Server. The last section is going to be on creating and altering SQL Server objects. Now, there's quite a bit of time that could be spent on all of this, that we could do an entire course on database design that could last, weeks and weeks and weeks. There's still quite a bit that could be covered on creating all the individual objects inside of there. My goal in this lesson is really to focus in on a high-level overview of working with SQL objects. So my target audience is for people who need to get a little bit more into SQL Server, developers who maybe need to create basic programming objects, people that are looking to take that 7461 exam, or people that maybe just want a little bit more information about this view that they're using or about this stored procedure that they're using. Exactly what is this? What goes on behind the scenes inside of there? Now, before we get started, I do want to highlight that when I go through this course, I focus a lot on syntax. In fact, you're going to notice that I spend very little time, if any at all, using the true designer, that everything that I'm going to be doing is inside of select statements. And I do that on purpose because I find that people who can write the queries have a very easy time going in and using a tool later on, but the reverse isn't always true. So I always focus in on how to do it inside of the query. You'd also notice, by the way, when you go to take the exam, that that's also going to be their focus. As a result, we've got a lot of syntax. And I want to highlight a couple of real quick things about how I'm going to be displaying syntax. You're going to notice that I might have something like just simply select, and that's where I'm specifying a command or an option or a keyword or something like that. You'll also notice that I'll have different variable names, if you will, placeholder names inside of angle brackets. So for example, here I've got angle, table, angle. What that is that's a placeholder for a table name. Then you're going to notice that I've got square brackets with maybe a couple of options separated by a pipe. What that's going to be indicating to you is that those are optional. So you could provide one, you could maybe provide multiple, or you could provide none. Contrast that with the curly braces, where I've got insert pipe update, pipe delete inside of curly braces. In that scenario, at least one and potentially more is required. And there is a little bit of an overview of the entire course. What do you say we get started?